Hi everyone, Graham here. We were really looking forward to being with you all in person, but unfortunately family circumstances mean that we're no longer able to do that, and so I've recorded this on video instead, and we are so much looking forward to being with you again at some point in the autumn, and it'd be great just to be there in person. There's nothing like being together in the same room, is there? And so we look forward to that. In the meantime, as a church, you're working your way through a series called Loving Like Jesus. And this week we're reflecting on sacrifice and one particular aspect of what that means in our lives. So we're going to read from Mark chapter 10 and verses 35 to 45. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we want you to do for us whatever we ask.' 'What do you want me to do for you?' he asked. And they replied, 'Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory.' 'You don't know what you're asking,' Jesus said. 'Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?' 'We can,' they answered. And Jesus said to them, 'You will drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with, but to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared.' When the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And so Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that those who are regarded as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" So the call of the world is to follow the way of the world. It's about personal advancement and success. It's about increasing wealth and comfort. It's about celebrity culture. And the question that James and John asked is one that we should all reflect on. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." We want you to do for us whatever we ask. And do we recognize deep down that this is a question that we ourselves put to God more often than we'd like to admit? See, we are self-centered and egocentric by virtue of our fallen nature and by virtue of our individualistic culture, which prizes personal freedom, personal wealth, success above everything else. We are the heroes of our own story. Everyone else's story revolves around us and our story. We're a culture that loves and indulges ourselves, where truth is whatever we want it to be as long as it's authentic to us. We're a culture that talks a lot about love, but a love that revolves around us and how it makes us feel. We're a culture that talks about caring for others but can't really reconcile that with the notion of personal sacrifice and the importance of the group rather than me as an individual. See, Jesus was and is countercultural in our world. See, he demonstrated his love for us by his sacrifice on the cross. He calls us to follow him and love others as he does, to serve them and sacrifice ourselves for them, because we're doing it for him. Romans 5:8 says, "God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." See, the demonstration of true love is sacrifice. Sacrifice by the Father. He sent his Son. 1 John 3:16 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us." So the definition of true love is sacrifice. Jesus laid down his life. And in 2 John 1 verse 6 it says, "And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands." This is what love for Jesus looks like in our lives, that we walk in obedience to the commands of Jesus. See, we're called to follow Jesus. And the disciples thought they were following the one who would be King of Israel, one who would release the people from the tyranny of the Romans and the yoke of the scribes and the Pharisees, one who would ultimately be famous and wealthy, and they would benefit. One who would sit on a throne and have power and glory. And in their minds, Jesus would come into his glory when he was enthroned as king. And when he did, they could be those on his right and his left as his chief advisors. But Jesus would actually come into his glory on the cross. And those on his right and his left, the thieves, would be sharing his shame and his death, not his glory and power. So the way of Jesus is the way of servanthood and sacrifice. Jesus says to James and John, "You will drink my cup and be baptized with my baptism." You're called to follow me, you're called to suffer, you're called to die. But this was not just a calling for them. In Luke 9, Jesus said to all of them, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." To carry a cross was not just a little difficulty in life that you have to bear. To carry a cross was the penalty of someone who was to die on that cross once they reached the place of execution. See, when Jesus said, "Follow me," he literally meant follow in my footsteps and be prepared for anything that happens to me to happen to you. To be prepared to follow my lifestyle. Jesus came to be a sacrifice. Jesus came to serve. And when we respond to Christ, we sacrifice our lives to him and for him. We literally follow where he leads. Jesus himself said that loving him was obeying him. In John 14, it says, "If you love me, keep my commands. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching." This is love demonstrated in our lives. It's our sacrifice in response to his greater sacrifice of love for us. Loving Jesus, following Jesus, is obedience to Jesus, and ultimately then sacrifice and service for him and to those around us. The answer to the question, what is the greatest commandment? In Mark 12, Jesus replied, "The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbour as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." See, our first priority is to love God with all our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. And our second priority is to allow that love to overflow to our neighbour. And according to the story Jesus told to illustrate this, our neighbour is anyone that we come across as we follow Jesus, even if they are our enemy. And we love them by taking risks for them, sacrificing our own safety, just like the man in the parable that Jesus told. We love them by stopping and helping them, by sacrificing our time. We love them by meeting their needs, by sacrificing our own resources. We love our neighbour by giving to them, sacrificing our own finances. See, we're called to have a personal lifestyle of love and service and sacrifice. Social action programs are good. They're great. But God did not call us to social action programs. He didn't call us to things put on by the church or through the church or by the leaders. God calls us to love anyone that he puts in our path, in our daily lives, our colleagues, our next door neighbours, the person we go to at the book club or the dance class, or wherever we go in our world. We're called to love them. We're also called to love and serve those that are not directly in our path, but they are in our community. And this was particularly true for the poor, the marginalised, the foreigner and the sick. He calls each one of us to individually love our neighbour, to have a lifestyle of loving our neighbour, not a program, but a lifestyle. And sometimes there are quite simple things that we can be involved in. So, for instance, Daryl and I are getting involved in our local community through a number of local activities to serve local people. And one of those is litter picking. Picking up litter from local streets and talking to the local people while we do it, and even getting them to come out and help us. And another one is what we call walk and talk, which is just walking locally and inviting local people to come in and talk to us and chat as we walk. And we're also hoping to be part of a social prescribing program in the community where the local GPs prescribe walking and community for their patients for the benefit of their mental and physical health, and work with local groups who can provide this as a service. How amazing to walk with people and be friends with them, and they are prescribed to do that with us by their GP. In Matthew 9 and Matthew 10 it says this, it says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And so Jesus called his 12 disciples to him, and it gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. And these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. And as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received. Freely give. See, Jesus' compassion for his neighbours were the catalyst for him to urge the disciples to pray for workers for the harvest, and then to send those same disciples in answer to their own prayer. Jesus freely sacrificed everything so that we could freely receive. You were freely received, Jesus said, now freely give. And this is following him. It's to sacrifice our lives in obedience to Christ so that we are freely giving. It's to pray for people that God has put us with. It's to pray for our street, for our town. Prayer, walking around our town, praying for the harvest, praying for workers, and then going ourselves. We are the answer to our own prayer. Another testimony for me is that for the last few months I have been prayer walking around various areas of my local town. Sometimes with Daryl, sometimes on my own. Praying for God to move, praying for people that I see, praying for God to break out in revival, to see people saved, see people healed. And we also study praying every week with other Christians for a variety of local initiatives, some of those that I mentioned earlier. See, we need God, I need God to soften our heart in prayer and to create a sense of urgency for the gospel in our local community. Because this is what following Jesus looks like. It looks like praying, and it looks like going. And it looks like understanding Jesus' example of service and sacrifice. Or how do we raise up more workers for the harvest? Well, one way is to create more workers to begin with. Before Jesus ascended back to his Father, he had one final encouragement and commission for the disciples. And we can read about this in Matthew 28. It says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. See, Jesus says, I have all authority. I have authority over the enemy. I have authority over demons. I have authority over sickness. I have authority over every circumstances. But he also has authority over us and over our lives. And Jesus says, on the basis of my authority, go and make disciples of all nations. It's not the responsibility of the church program to make disciples, it's mine. It's not the responsibility of the church program to communicate the gospel and to help people to faith. It's ours. It's not the responsibility of the church program to baptize people and disciple them per se. It's my responsibility and yours. This is our responsibility as individuals. We're not called to bring people to a program or bring people to meetings, or even though those things are good. We're called to go, and we're called to make disciples, each one of us. And we're called to go to people. We're not called to bring people to us or bring them into our meetings. We're called to go to them. How do we do that? How do we begin to make disciples of those that we already connect with, perhaps? Our work colleagues or those friends that we have in that setting that we spend time in during the week. See, it requires an investment of time, an investment of love, an investment of friendship, an investment of service. Time we could be spending on other things in our lives, maybe even church things, church meetings. It requires an investment of ourselves in people's lives. How do we connect? How do we invest with people we wouldn't normally meet? Never mind those we meet on a daily basis, particularly those of a different age or background or community to us. It's about intention. It's about sitting down and prioritizing what's in our lives and what's in what's in our hearts. Taking opportunities to offer to pray for people who are sick or have major needs or issues. It makes a way for the Gospels. If we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus made a way by praying for people, by loving them, by sitting with them. You know, he was known as a friend of sinners. I wonder whether that particular insult that was thrown at Jesus could be thrown at you or I. You know, I've personally seen people come to Christ through lots of different ways, knocking on their door, talking to them in the street, praying for them when they're sick. I've seen work colleagues come to things and engage, talking about the gospel over my life as a Christian. But what I have realised is that over the last few years and over the increasing involvement in the mechanics of church life and in leadership and church activity, the less time I've had to invest in people outside of that church. And it is a pattern that I can trace in my life. The more time that has been spent, good time in good activities, but it's the less time that I've had to invest in people outside of the church, in their lives, in communicating the love of Jesus to them. And that is something I'm now having to reverse. I'm having to backtrack. I'm having to change. And we all need to be aware of this and be aware of it. It's good to be involved in church and in church community, and I'm certainly not dissuading you from that. But actually we have to balance up how our lives work and where our priorities are. And actually, what does living the life of Jesus and following Jesus mean for us? And it's important that we move from a model of trying to bring people into church events or meetings to connect, trying to bring people to us rather than going to them. And we need God to speak to us about how do we go to them. And I know that there are already things happening in Huddersfield where that will be an example of this. Because so often people are so much more open to hear the gospel when we are on their territory. And I guess you guys have probably heard about what's happened in the Darlington Food Bank over the last 12 months or so, where for 7 years they ran a food bank and provided a wonderful service to the town. But in terms of seeing lives change for the gospel, they hadn't seen anything. And yet, once lockdown hit last year, suddenly things began to happen. And over the year, more and more people responded to the gospel. People were healed when they were prayed for. People were set free from addictions. And certainly the last I heard, which was a few weeks ago, 33 people had responded to Christ. And you think, well, what changed? What was different? Well, one of the things that changed was that they met people and talked to people in the car park, not in the building. And you might think, well, that's a little thing and that couldn't possibly have made any difference. But actually, when we engage people either in their own setting or a neutral setting, and we're not trying to bring them into something that we are putting on in that sense, we will find that people are more open to the gospel. So how high a priority is it for you and I to love and serve others around us? How high a priority is it for us to pray for the harvest or to communicate the gospel? Is it as important as our desire to focus on our own needs? Is it more important than some of our personal downtime? Is it more important than some of our church time, even some of our own meetings? See, in our commission to pray and go, we are called to be a sacrifice, to die to ourselves, to die to our priorities, our comfort, living instead for Jesus and his mission, a sacrificial lifestyle of love and service and prayer and disciple making. See, in conclusion, Jesus said that to be a disciple meant to deny ourselves, to sacrifice our own desires and comfort and vision, to take up our cross daily, to be prepared to serve, suffer, die if necessary for the gospel every day, to follow him, to follow Jesus in being a disciple, being transformed by obeying everything Jesus commanded and being accountable with other disciples that you're in community with, to follow Jesus by making disciples, going wherever Jesus sends you. That may just be to the people in your town, but it is going to them, not expecting them to come to you, and personally discipling and teaching them to obey Jesus. See, in 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says Christ's love compels us. Christ's love compels us. And the basis of following Jesus is his love. His love compels us. It compels us to live for him. It compels us to sacrifice to him and for him. It compels us to serve. It compels us to obey. It compels us to love those around us. To follow Jesus sacrificially means truly to give our lives, to love God with all our heart, our strength, our soul, our mind, to love each other, to love our neighbour, to pray for the harvest, to make disciples. These should be the main criteria for success as a Christian and success in our churches. See, we have fallen into a culture where the measurement of success in our churches is how many people there are on a Sunday listening to us preach, or how many people are in our small groups. And we can be dragged into trying to attract in other Christians. And there's nothing wrong with other Christians joining us, but it's not our main calling. I wonder what would happen if we were to measure the success of our churches by how many new disciples we were each baptizing and each teaching to obey everything Jesus commanded. So there is a quote from Rick Warren which says this: "You measure a church's strength not by its seating capacity, but by its sending capacity. You measure a church's strength not by its seating capacity, but by its sending capacity." What would it be like if we all were truly sent? And I'm praying for you guys as a church that you are increasingly sent as individuals into the worlds in which you live. You are increasingly equipped. You are increasingly compelled by the love of Jesus to love your neighbour. Not in some programmatic way, but in life. Compelled to seek out neighbours. Those you're never going to meet. Those you'll never come into contact with. Those who are nothing like you. I pray that the love of God compels you. And the power of God equips you as you're in your world, as you increasingly are led out beyond what would normally be your day-to-day life, that the people you would normally meet, that God uses you powerfully in the areas in which you live. And so I leave you with that. I leave you to reflect on what following Jesus truly means, what living a sacrificial life in our following of Jesus, what does that mean? Let's reflect on that together as individuals and also as a church, that God leads us into new ways and a new passion and a new desire to sacrifice ourselves for Jesus and to Jesus and for those around us. Great to speak to you. Looking forward to seeing you again, hopefully in the not too distant future. Until then, see you soon.